Best of the Unseen Steam archive. Written and produced by our expert production team, you can also order issues 1, 2 and 3 online from our shop, now for just £12.99.
The 060 steam locomotive type can fairly be described as the archetypical British steam design, the first such being the famous Royal George, built by Timothy Hackworth for the Stockton and Darlington Railway in 1827. Having all its weight on the powered wheels gave the type the best power-to-weight ratio, and it was still the principal wheel arrangement for goods or freight designs at the end of the 19th century. Here we see number 2538, one of the Great Western Railway's so-called Dean goods engines, still at work in the middle of the 20th century as it shunts the terminus of the Kerry branch near Welshpool in 1956, a year before its withdrawal as the last of its class. One survives. Perhaps the best known of the many 060 types, and here we're concentrating on tender versions only, were those of the Midland Railway with its notorious small engine policy, under which additional locomotives were added to trains if the latter were too much for just one. Large numbers were built, distinguished merely by their power classifications from 1Fs to 4Fs. This is BR number 58173, a 2F fitted with a Dealey cab, somewhere on the Midland Main Line in early BR days. At Cudworth on the 30th December 1955, we see one of the next power classification up, a 3F, number 43789. Although it's small, the train behind it is even smaller. Midland engines were really quite powerful for their small size. The LMS wasn't particularly worried about individual locomotive classifications, merely the power they displayed. Here's another 3F. But this one is at Aviemore in Scotland and had been inherited from the Caledonian Railway. Number 57634 and its classmates were known as jumbos to the railway's employees. In the south of England there were few goods duties. South Eastern and Chatham had 109 of these Class C engines, the largest number of 060s of one type of the Southern Railway which inherited them. The various constituent parts of the LNER handed that company vast fleets of 060s, the relatively small Great Central handing over no less than 356 of them, split into four classes, LNER J10 to J13. These engines represented around 40% of the entire GCR steam locomotive stock. This is 65168, a J10, at Didsbury on the CLC lines in February 1956. Another J10, they were the products of Thomas Parker, is seen on LMR metals on the 11th of December the year before at Northampton-from-Withenshaw station. The J11s were designed by the famous John Robinson and were known as pom-poms due to their sharp exhaust resembling the sound of early machine guns of the time. 64435 is seen at Marple, to the southwest of Manchester, in April 1956. The North Eastern Railway produced many 060s, the ultimate version being the LNER Class J27s, such as 65810, which is seen at Newsham in 1956. The Midlands' ultimate goods type was the 4F, 197 of which were built by the company. However, the company's chief mechanical engineer, Henry Fowler, became CME of the LMS Railway in 1925, shortly after its formation in 1923, and imposed the Midlands small engine policy on the giant company. A further 534 Fs were built by the LMS under Fowler, and, much against his better judgment, 45 more were added after William Stanier took over. These ones are seen at Bucksworth, Stafford and Pensford Warmley. Although Gresley built his classes J38 and J39 for the LNER, not too many other 060s were built in the grouping years, but the Great Western under Collett built a total of 120 of Class 2251 to replace the old Dean goods on secondary lines, the last as late as 1948. Perhaps the biggest surprise in the history of the 060 goods engine was the construction of 40 of them by the Southern Railway in 1942. They were designed by Oliver Bulleid, better known for his eccentric Pacifics, but looked like something built from Lego bricks. Nevertheless, the Q1s were extremely powerful and cheap to build during the war. The first development of the goods engine following the 060 came in the late 19th century, when an additional wheel set was provided to expand the design into an 080. This still had the advantage of having all its weight on the powered axles, as well as having increased braking force, which was vital in the days of unbraked goods wagons. The greatest proponent was the London and North Western Railway, whose Francis Webb produced no fewer than 282 compound expansion ones before his successor modified the design to simple expansion and built 290 more. Most of the Webb ones were rebuilt to the simple type, but their whole history is extremely complicated. Suffice to say, the early Class A compound design became Class D when rebuilt as simples, and when superheated, the whole group of 080s became known as Super Ds. That's short for superheated Ds. It wasn't just that someone thought that they were super. The survivors were actually Class G2 or G2A. The Super Ds were the only XLNWR locomotive type to survive in large numbers through LMS days and into BR ownership. As a result, they became much sought after, and there's quite good coverage of them on film. These first two scenes being filmed at New Mills Newtown and Pennington in 1953 and 1955 respectively. We now move into 1956, where we see some tender first running with Super Ds. This was quite common, and a number of them are fitted with tender cabs to make the crews more comfortable on these workings. We're now on Merseyside between Ditton and Allerton in 1959, where the Super Ds, this one with a tender cab, were still very active. One of their last homes was at Bescot in the Midlands. Here a pair is seen on the 16th of July 1964, probably laid up and soon to be scrapped. The last ones were retired that year. One is preserved. Another class of 080s survived right to the end of steam in the North East in 1967. These were the LNER Class Q6 locomotives, North Eastern Railway Class T2, of which 120 were built. They were extremely successful and superheated from new, the whole class bar one lasting in service from 1913 until 1963, the final few going in 1967 when steam was eliminated in the North East. This one, number 63395, is seen at Easington in 1960, being withdrawn on the 9th of September 1967 as the last of the class and subsequently entering preservation. Sister Q6 number 63429 is seen in its last days at Penshaw in spring 1967, this engine being condemned quite shortly thereafter on the 1st of July that year. The last act in the story of 080s in Great Britain was Fowler's attempted update of the LNWR Super D design in 1929. Both types were classified as 7F, but the new engines were designed at Derby and had all the bad characteristics of Midland engines, notably poor axle bearings. The first one we see is reversing into oblivion over Somerset Viaduct on the East Lancs Railway in 1955, and the engine at Ashbury's was filmed in September the following year. There were 175 of them, but they were all withdrawn, unloved, by BR between 1949 and 1962. At an appropriately snowy Snow Hill station in Birmingham in 1959, we see one of the first designs of goods locomotives to have a leading pony truck, one of Churchward's famous standard range of locomotives for the Great Western Railway. The prototype of what became the 2800 class was number 97, built in 1903, and the result of his application of ideas from the USA, where the 280 or consolidation type of locomotive had become the de facto freight locomotive over there. This engine was the first British 280, the addition of the pony truck giving the engine an improved ride for the crews and making the engines easier on the track. This led to higher speeds for freight work, and it would be the penultimate goods or freight locomotive style in this country. But more about that shortly. Construction of the 2800s, the later ones were classified 2884s, but all were almost identical, was spread over 38 years, until there were 167 of them, and the Westerns still wanted more. These last two are seen on ex-GWR metals at Crupperty and King Sutton in 1963. The Great Central Railway had experimented with 080 freight engines, but its great engineer Robinson soon saw that the leading pony truck gave a huge boost to the functionality of the design. He produced his Class 8K in 1911, and 126 were built before the Great War broke out. GCR's energetic general manager, Sam Fay, became a member of the War Department's Railway Executive Committee and ensured that the 8K became the standard railway operating division of the Royal Engineers locomotive. 521 more locomotives were built and 311 were sent to France, although most returned after the war. The LNER inherited the ex-GCR machines and bought a further 273 of the ROD machines, classifying them all as Class 04 and making them their standard heavy goods engines. Here an 04 is seen in its latter years at home on ex-GCR metals at Retford, whilst an underpass was being built beneath the East Coast Main Line. During World War II, the LNER, under Edward Thompson, rebuilt 58 04s as 01s using modern Walschaerts valve gear as a new standard LNER freight class, and number 63786 was filmed at Manchester, Victoria on the 11th of November 1955. At Whittaker Junction on the 16th of July 1964, we see two of what were to become to the Second World War what the GCR 8K design had been to the First World War. These are Stanier Class 8F freight engines, a type built for the LMS as its standard goods engine from 1935 onwards and adopted as a war standard for the BEF, but not delivered until after the fall of France. 852 of these engines were produced between 1935 and 1946, but only 666 of them found their way back into British Railways stock. The other 186 never returned to BR during the Age of Steam, although some have since been repatriated by preservationists. These engines saw service in many theatres of war, in Egypt, Iran, Italy, Palestine and Turkey. Most of the WD ordered engines remained in the UK and were used by the Big Four for war work. In the last days of BR Steam, a light 8F is seen on what was the class's classic stamping ground, the line to Shap Summit on the West Coast Main Line in Cumbria. Another 8F approaches with a short freight. By this time, 1st of April 1967, freight traffic on BR was dwindling somewhat rapidly. The 8Fs remained at work until the bitter end for steam, August 1968. In those last dark days, number 48278 is seen at Runcorn, moving empty coal wagons out of the sidings onto the main line under the catenary which had presaged the death of steam here. Although the 8Fs had been produced for war work in large quantities, the War Department wanted to produce war engines in even greater numbers but at far less cost. Thus the 8F design was stripped down to basics, and what was to become known as the WD Austerity, or WD 280, was created. Intended for short lives only, these engines proved to be long-lasting, and of the 935 built, 733 became British Railways stock, and 123 of these were still at work at the beginning of 1967. After our first view of an unidentified one at Chinley South Junction in 1956, we see number 90497 at North Cave around about the same time. This is WD number 90496 near Whittaker Junction, once again on the 16th of July 1964. The wartime modification to the 8F design to produce the WD 280s had been engineered by Robert, known as Robin, Riddles, who was to become, effectively, the British Railways chief mechanical engineer and the father of the BR standard steam locomotive range. During the war, the 280 design had been expanded to a 210 version, initially in order to spread the weight of the locomotive over more axles for use on lightly laid overseas lines. Riddles was very impressed with this design and used the 210 layout for what was to become his most successful and BR's ultimate steam design of all, the famous Class 9F 210, known as spaceships to the legions of young lads, the loco spotters, who were growing up in the 1950s. Various tests were conducted to assess the full potential of these engines, and these scenes show preparations for what was possibly the most ambitious of these, which involved a pair of 9Fs, numbers 92156 and 92153, on a massive coal train over the old Midland lines around the Mansfield and Radford areas in 1956. Our cameraman was involved in these tests and rode in the cab of the train engine, recording most of the action. His line-side footage of the actual tests is part of the Unseen archive and can be viewed by subscribers to Unseen Steam. The web address is on the cover of this DVD. The 9F was intended to be used by all regions of BR, with the exception of the southern, which didn't have sufficient heavy freight work for them in the early 1950s when the design was finalised. The first 10, built in 1954, were allocated to the western region, which didn't want them. As mentioned earlier, the Western wanted more of its own Class 2800 goods engines, but Riddles refused to authorise these, although a BR Standard Class 8F 280 was sketched out for the Western, but never built. In time, the Western received a further 48 of the 9Fs, the last built steam engines of all for BR, acquired between 1958 and 1960. The way to tell for which region the 9F was built was the shape of its tender. Western ones all had the inset coal bunker type designated BR1G, as seen here at Snow Hill in 1962. London Midland and North Eastern region engines sported curved top coal bunkers in LMS style, illustrated here at Croprety on the 18th of June 1963 of type BR1B or 1C. Once again we're near Whittaker Junction on the 16th of July 1964, where an Eastern Region 9F shows its high-sided tender of BR type BR1F, the only region to adopt this largest version of the BR standard tenders for 9Fs. The Southern was the only other user of the BR1F, for 10 of its standard Class 5 460s. In due course, all remaining 9Fs gravitated to the London Midland region, as steam's realm dwindled to the northwest and all types of tender would be seen working over Shap. This is Shapwell's on the 1st of April 1967. Note the chimney on this 9F. The early ones were fitted with single chimneys, so this, with its BR1G tender, is one of the first 10 members of the class originally foisted upon the western region. Later engines were built with double chimneys, and a few of the first batch also received them late in their lives. There was only one major variation of the 9F design. In 1955, 10 locomotives, numbers 92020 to 92029, were fitted with an Italian invention known as the Krusty boiler. This was supposed to be an important step forward in steam technology, incorporating a preheater under the normal boiler. This meant that the latter had to be smaller than standard in order to fit within the tight British loading gauge, and the experiment was a dismal failure. The 10 engines had the Krusty fittings removed, and the boiler modified to work normally, but the general outline remained distinctive, as seen on this ex-Krusty ascending Shap at Scout Green, also on the 1st of April 1967. The smaller boiler led to them being classified 8F, so perhaps that's why this one has a slightly bigger banker in the form of a BR Standard Class 4 460.